Ever since the gaming industry established this huge and growing demand for more of that From Software and Dark Souls formula, developers across the globe have tried time and time again to match up and copy FromSoft's every move, but in the end, when they finish developing their knockoff games, they all end up realising they're just not as capable at developing such intricacies, and they're simply just boys amongst men.
This is a big important game.
It's a big important game.
Cut the crap.
Cut the crap.
I'm being serious, don't do that.
I'm being serious, don't do that.
How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Yeah, that's what I thought. Shut up.
This is one genre of games that in principle should be easy to emulate, but has proven nearly impossible to replicate and achieve that same level of detail, from the coding within the combat mechanics to the more noticeable things like the narrative world building and the RPG systems. FromSoft have never stood still because they know that standing still is moving backwards, and they have every confidence to not only release open beta versions of their game 4 months before its release for the world to see, but they also have the confidence to welcome other developers attempting to copy their game designs. Before Elden Ring, I doubt many AAA developers saw From Software as much of a threat. They never really put much into marketing their games and relied heavily on their niche hardcore fanbase to promote within, and they certainly don't have a AAA bottomless pit of money to invest in their games either.
But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. Skills I've acquired over a very long career. Skills that make me a nightmare for people like you.
But mark my words, since Elden Ring's success, we'll start to see some major AAA developers try their hand at the Souls-like formula, but prior to Elden Ring, we've seen so many smaller developers try their hand at creating a Souls-like game and offering their own slant on things. Developers Cold Symmetry are a team of AAA veterans, passionate about the Souls-like genre, and were one of the most recent to dabble in the art of Souls-like games. Releasing Mortal Shell in August 2020, they shamelessly came very close to giving me the same joy that I felt from the classic original Dark Souls. They didn't, mind you, but they came very close. Mortal Shell is a great game for those who've always thought that the Soulsborne series of games were a little excessive in their difficulty, but rather than simply having their hand held for them as the alternative, they still get to experience that same level of
We play as a faceless being known as a foundling, an empty vessel who's implored to do the bidding of the Dark Father and track down the hidden sanctums of devout followers in a broken and desolate world where the remains of humanity have rotten and withered away.
Yeah, I've actually got COVID right now, so I'm proper making good use of my COVID voice there. Did you hear that? Proper trailer voice. So, simple enough then, a load of cryptic bollocks, so you'll need to piece all that together while fighting your way through a shit ton of highly disturbing adversaries and boss battles until the credits roll. Very Dark Souls-esque. There are some fundamental differences though, some that work really well and some that work well to begin with, but eventually they fizzle out during the mid to late game. The shells are what work really well, and it's a strategic and deliberate system that I really enjoyed using. Shells are presented as characters that you encounter the corpses of, and inhabiting their shell, i.e. armour, players will be able to learn more about that particular shell's past, and eventually you'll learn their combat style and unlock various abilities. But in order to obtain their shell, you must find out and learn their names, which can be done by spending tar, which is the currency you'll earn through killing enemies, and you'll lose your tar on death with one chance to retrieve it. There's this creepy masked lady who'll act as a bonfire or a checkpoint for those not familiar with the FromSoft bonfires. Here you can upgrade your shell into set skills focused around that particular shell. This is where experimenting with each shell comes in, finding your favourite, and each skill is upgraded using the tar you've accumulated or found as a consumable. But there's also glimpses, which are a much rarer form of currency to upgrade, and these seemed kind of pointless and stitched onto the upgrade system. It felt like they were added just to offer something additional with not much substance to them when you're leveling up. There's 4 shells to choose from, and they each offer wide varieties in play styles, from being an all-rounder, a tank in the health department but low in the stamina department, or not so high with the health but really high in resolve, which is your third meter to use a alongside stamina and health, which is used for parry ripostes and special weapon abilities. I really like the Shells and Cold Symmetry's take on the playstyles because I often boxed myself into a playstyle when playing a FromSoft game, and switching up mid-playthrough is extortionately expensive, but with the 4 shells you find as you progress, it felt good to experiment, simply changing your shell at the Fallgrim Tower, a location you'll find early on, but it felt even better to switch between shells before facing a particular boss that might suit a different playstyle. By using a consumable effigy you can do that, and it's specific to that shell. These effigies are not that common, but we're given much more encouragement to experiment within a single playthrough compared to FromSoft games, and even more so when you carry your shells over into a new game plus. The other notable aspect that differs from a traditional FromSoft game are the consumables, of which there aren't anywhere near as many, but again, we're encouraged to experiment because unlike a FromSoft game consumable, there's no description for them to let you know what it does. Cold Symmetry were just like, oh, I'm sorry, are you wondering what this mysterious golden mushroom does? Or perhaps what ailments this boiled frog might offer? Well,
just try it.
No, I don't want to.
There's a merchant to find, which is another way to spend your hard-earned tar, and he's got some rare key items to help upgrading your weapons, so worth visiting when you're packing some serious tar. There are 4 main weapons to use, found by defeating a hardening boss who's wielding that weapon, with each weapon having a separate upgrade path to follow, all requiring certain items that can be found out when exploring. Like the shells, these weapons offer a different playstyle and don't necessarily have to be linked to a certain shell either, and again, they all feel varied in their swing timing and showcase some pretty cool abilities specific to each one. The level design felt okay, it was a little forced at times I must admit. The first area is really cool and it's easy to get lost in with so many intertwining linear paths to wander down, and there's rewarding treasure that's hidden all over the vast array of biomes to explore. But there are these little burrowed tunnels that we can navigate through, and these are the things that felt a little forced. They felt like an attempt to replicate that same feeling you get from a FromSoft game when you unlock the other side of that door or pull that elevator lever, exposing a life-saving shortcut, but these burrowed holes just do not feel anywhere near as gratifying when it comes to level design. The enemies were a little artificial in their placement within each level at times too, simply just standing there at times and not exactly being well hidden either, when clearly there was supposed to be an element of surprise. The enemies themselves and their designs, they were pretty awesome though, from one of the coolest designs ever being this dude that's impaled with swords and he pulls them out of himself to launch at you. Yeah, I know, right?
Boring.
But not only that, if those moves don't work, he'll just rip his own poisonous head off and launch it at you instead. Seems reasonable, but even the bog standard enemies early on really try their best to intimidate you as they approach, a la Vince McMahon or Conor McGregor style.
No chance, that's what you got. No chance, that's what you got.
Now the combat is where I felt the game got off to a good start, with a steep learning curve as well as the already mentioned variety in playstyles through switching shells and the really unique hardening mechanic. With one button you'll become encrusted in this concrete-like state, immune to all attacks, and even leave a small window to counter after being hit in this state. This hardening ability has a time limit and a cooldown too, so using it tactically becomes an essential part of every playstyle you choose to adopt, and this is where my biggest problem with the game comes in. I found out that I'm not the only one to figure this out either, so don't think of this being a one-off. The tactic of backing far enough away from an enemy swing to then run in for an attack, hit the enemy with a few blows, then just as the enemy inevitably starts their own attack move, you hit the harden button, absorb the blow and back away again. This tactic does take a little more patience, but it was far too easy to execute for almost the entire game. There's the odd boss that requires a different approach, which I welcomed because I want that differing challenge. Predictable isn't satisfying to overcome. This was a huge flaw in the combat mechanics in my opinion, and one that couldn't exactly be nerfed either because it was baked into the game and the enemy's attack patterns. I even ended up starting to ignore this option and play the game a different way, which made the game feel more traditionally challenging like a Souls game should do, but the fact that there's a tactic that was so easy to execute with a little bit of patience, it was borderline cheesing at times. Like I said though, there are plenty of other playstyles, and the use of the shell giving you one last chance mid-fight, this was a really cool mechanic. Running out of health would see your fleshy sack of bones foundling character fly out of his shell, which returns him to his original one hit and you're dead form. But during this time you can sprint back to your frozen shell and hop back in one last time, and I thought this was really cool. The atmosphere throughout sounds great, with some cool weapon effects slashing flesh or clanging against armour, as well as the deafening silence of a woodland with only your footsteps sloshing in the boggy swamps and poisonous frogs croaking as you get closer, but there's virtually no music at all. There were times the absence of music destroyed the atmosphere, feeling almost too barren. Those little cutscenes to any boss battle in a FromSoft game are always so interesting and usually disgusting, but you just can't look away. The music during these scenes and throughout the fight itself just crunks up the intensity so many levels, to the point where I've genuinely seen some people advise that you turn it down just so you can focus on the fight. Mortal Shell offers a constant drone of ambience instead, and not including any music not only removes the pressurizing, palm sweat inducing difficulty, but the whole encounter just feels void of any memorable consequence. It allows me to think and tackle each boss tactically instead, with zero emotion panicking me into making a bad decision. Graphically it's pretty nice looking, with occasional bleak and overly saturated textures, but mostly it looks crisp, and I really appreciated the difference in visuals when it comes to the biomes too. Again, these were really enjoyable to explore and pleasing on the eye while exploring. Performance was solid and locked at 60 on max settings, but this was with a 3090 and an i9, which isn't exactly much of a gauge, but it was just as solid at 4K max settings on a 3070 laptop with an i9, which might help a few more people gauge the performance for your own systems. There's render scaling and DLSS available here too, so plenty of tweaking available to get the game running to the best of your available specs. I've spent a lot of time comparing Mortal Shell to the original Souls-like creations, and normally I'd try to highlight the differences without comparing so much, but the developers have openly stated where their inspiration came from and made no efforts to pretend Mortal Shell isn't based on any other game. Mortal Shell is currently $30 on PC and console, with next-gen consoles boasting 4K visuals and 60 FPS performance, and it's also available on Game Pass. Whatever system you're on, this one's worth your time, especially if you're craving that original Dark Souls experience. It's shamelessly based on the Dark Souls franchise and makes zero effort to hide where it drew its inspiration from, and while it's not perfecting the From Software formula, it still managed to offer its own enjoyable slant on things. The combat system works for the most part, and even though a certain tactic becomes a little too easy to utilise through most encounters, you're still always one or two greedy mistakes away from death, meaning there's enough of a challenge here to excite even veteran Souls players, and certainly enough variety to the playstyles, using each shell to warrant some fun experimentation. It's a rewarding and fairly deep combat focused RPG that seamlessly weaves a mysterious story into a dark world that's as intriguing as it is oppressive. So, have you had your eye on Mortal Shell already, or are you looking for a fresh take on a Souls-like adventure after finishing Elden Ring? If you do give this one a whirl, let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.